Thanks for joining us for this final Salon series of the season, previewing Opera Lafayette's upcoming performances of Mouret's Les Fêtes de Thalie. And we're so grateful this evening to have with us three people who are integral to this production, the musicologist, Rebecca Harris-Warrick, the stage director, Catherine Turocy, and the tenor performer, Patrick Kilbride. So I'll introduce each of our panelists just briefly right off the top, and then we'll dive into a series of presentations from them in turn. As always, we'll have time for discussion. At the end of the hour, we'll reserve a good 15 minutes or so for discussion. So you're welcome to hold your questions until then, or put your questions into the chat, and Jason and I will have them at the ready for our speakers. So the first thing we're going to hear is a little bit of a background about this opera from Rebecca Harris-Warrick, who's Professor Emerita of Music at Cornell University. She has an interdisciplinary background in musicology, performance, dance history, and literature, which she applied to her primary research interests in French opera of the 17th and 18th centuries. You can see why she'd be a really excellent speaker to be telling us about this work. Her most recent book is Dance and Drama in French Baroque Opera, which was published by Cambridge University Press. Next up, we'll have Catherine Turocy speak with us, who's recognized as one of today's leading choreographers and stage directors in Baroque period performance and taking charge of this production, one of among over 80 Baroque operas to her credit. She's the co-founder of New York Baroque Dance Company and has received many, many accolades from her work, including being named Chevalier in the Order of Arts and Letters from the Republic of France. She's also a founding member of the Society of Dance History Scholars and has lectured and written widely on period performance practices. So she'll have a great perspective as well. Then finally, we're going to hear a little bit more about the music of this opera from the tenor Patrick Kilbride, who's a graduate of Northwestern, as well as the University of Maryland Opera Studio. He's performed in opera houses throughout the world in the United States, from Paris to Versailles to DC and New York. And he's appeared in many Opera Lafayette productions, including this year's Esther, last year's Io of Rameau, and Pergolesi's La Servante Maîtresse, and as well as we'll be performing in Les Fêtes de Thalie. So I'm so excited to hear more about these productions, and I will pass the baton to Becky. Take it away.
Okay, let me share my screen. Let's see, where's my, there we go. Let's see, is this all working? Yes, is that
Looks
working
great.
now? Is all
Looks
visible?
great.
Okay,
Yep.
Terrific. Good, good. All right. Well, in the little blurb that you all read before you decided to come on to this salon today, I called Les Fêtes de Thalie anomalous. And it definitely is anomalous for many ways that we'll be talking about, but it also has a context. And that's what I really want to concentrate on today, that it's not completely isolated in the world of French Baroque opera, but it does have connections with other things that were going on around it. So my main points that I want to cover in the time I have are the meanings, the two key words in the title, fête and Thalie, what that's all about. And then I want to tell you something about the librettist, La Font, and the composer Mouret. And along the way, I'm going to be touching on quite a bit about the cultural environment in Paris in 1714. So let's see, why is that not working? There we go. Okay. So here you see the title page of the libretto of Les Fêtes de Thalie from its revival in 1745. Now, I chose this one because I wanted to make the point to you that when a work was successful at the Paris Opera, it got revived several times. And I find it interesting that the libretto, which is published and people would have in their hands when they went to the theater, would give the dates of all of the prior performances. And that's something that even still happened, not quite, but almost at the Paris Opera today. When you go and you go to see Madame Butterfly, it'll say, you know, this is the 1754th performance of this work at the Paris Opera. So this is a little bit on that same kind of a thing. So you see that by 1745, you have the original date of the performance in 1714. It was revived in 1722 and again in 1735. And as a matter of fact, revivals went on longer than this, as we will also see. So what about the, I just wanted to point out here too, that the Académie Royale de Musique is the official name of the Paris Opera. And then also that this work is called a ballet. I'm going to come back to that point in a minute. But first, let's talk about the word fête. Now, the word fête is, there's no single equivalent in English for that, the way it was used in the 18th century France. So I think the closest words that we have are something like an entertainment or a party or celebrations. And the word appeared in quite a number of opera titles, as you can see here. Here's just some of them, works that are called fête in the title. But the important thing that I wanted to say about this is that these works, anything called a fête was a lightweight work, and it was more like, well, it has affinities with musical comedy in a sense. It's not spoken dialogue yet. This is all sung, but it's supposed to make you at least smile, if not always laugh. And so today, but we can't use the word ballet, even though these words were called ballet at the time, because for us, the word ballet means something that doesn't have any singing in it. It's only danced. So we have to come up with another term. And one of the ones that was used a little bit in the 18th century was opera ballet. So that's what the term is usually used for this kind of work today, because it implies a structure, not just a spirit. So an opera ballet has a prologue, and then it has 3 or 4 independent acts, each with its own story, but they're connected by a theme. So we'll talk about Les Fêtes de Thalie in a minute, but let me just say about Les Fêtes Vénitiennes, you can see the word Venice in there. So this is a work that had several different independent acts, all with stories that were set in Venice during the Carnival season. So there are stories that have people gambling, and others where they're going to balls, and others where they're all of them engaging in amorous intrigues of some type or other. So, all of these things have a structure that's important to them. And wait a minute, before I got there, I wanted to just show you a little work that invokes the Venetian theme of Les Fêtes Vénitiennes, or maybe Le Carnaval de Venise. And if you can see over here, this is Harlequin, female harlequin, who's dancing there. And there's a Chinese character here, an exotic character, and that's somebody that shows up in the libretto for Les Fêtes de Thalie as well. Okay, here we go. This is the structure of Les Fêtes de Thalie. So you have the prologue, and then in this case we have an epilogue. That's unusual, but there is one. And then in the middle, there are 3 independent acts, each based around a stage in a woman's love life. So there's the girl who's being courted and maybe gets married at the end. The second one is about the coquettish widow, who's very happy to be a widow. And the third one is called the wife, and she gets amorously involved independently with her own husband. I'm not going to talk about the plots because you'll have a chance to read them all. There's a synopsis that I've written that will be posted on the website of Opera Lafayette very soon, and you'll get to see that there. But so what I do want to go on is talk more about the Thalie part now that we've talked through the fête. So as I think you all know, there were not, in classical mythology, there were 9 muses, each one of them in charge of a different art, and they were all overseen by Apollo. He was the god there. We have, oh no, I'm going to go back to this one for a minute. So in Les Fêtes de Thalie, there are 4 of the 9 muses and put in appearance one way or another. And in the prologue, it's 2 of them. So one of them is Melpomene, the muse of tragedy, and the other is Thalie, the muse of comedy. And La Font decided to build the prologue around them as a way of arguing the merits of having comedy on the Paris opera stage, because this was, in fact, very unusual. It was not the first time this had happened, but it was unusual, and especially at this level of comedy. So the 2 characters come on stage, and first we get Melpomene, who introduces the opera with these words: "Theater of my glory, where music reigns, receive your laws from my divine guidance. My subjects are kings, heroes, and gods. Nothing can equal my grandiose spectacles." And then she goes on to list a whole bunch of the operas. This is like the greatest hits of Melpomene, the tragic operas that she had overseen. And the first 5 out of the 6 that are listed there are all by Lully. So she's boasting about what she's done on the stage. But, of course, Thalie, her sister, interrupts with this reply: "My sister, a single word suffices to show that I am owed the preference. One is soon tired of weeping. Is one ever tired of laughing?" So they keep squabbling for a while, and who comes down to settle their quarrel but Apollo himself? And Apollo decides that they will have to take turns, and that this particular day the show will be for Thalie. So then we're set up. And La Font was doing this because he anticipated that people going to the Paris Opera would be concerned about having such so overt comedy on the stage. And he was right, as we will see. So let's see. I wanted to show you now, here's a fashion plate, basically, of Thalie. This is not a picture of something that was taken from this opera. Bonnard did not do that at the time, but it shows Thalie, the Muse of Comedy. And what I really wanted you to see, although you can't read it, is what it says underneath. So I'm going to read it to you. This is the little blurb on the bottom underneath. The legend argues in favor of comedy. It says, comedy imitates what happens in daily life and is a faithful image of the ridiculousness of human behavior. This is what the mirror in the hand of the muse signifies. That's a common trope, that comedy holds up a mirror to daily life. But I also want to show you back here, if I can get my cursor there, here, the little stage behind her, you can see Harlequin there again, as she's getting ready to, the kind of the shows that she would oversee would be ones that were likely to have a comic character such as Harlequin in there. So there was enough criticism of this show that by people that's reflected in the Mercure, the monthly newspaper that came out, that many people did think this was not an appropriate work for the Paris Opera, that they would rather have been seeing Armide. But the Mercure Galant said, many people have criticized Les Fêtes de Thalie, but it has been playing for 2 months on the stage of the Opéra. So it may have been criticized, but it was extremely popular. However, La Font decided that he needed to offer further ammunition to defend himself. So he added at the end of the opera a critique of the Fêtes de Thalie. And so this is the score. You can see here it mentions Mouret, the composer. And it was added in October 1714, so 2 months after the work premiered, right around the same time that the Mercure was saying how it had been criticized. And in this, I don't have any dialogue to show you, but the muses come back. And it starts with Polyhymnia, who's the muse of music, and she's saying, oh, well, it's all because of my beautiful music that this work was so successful. And Thalie says, no, it was my libretto. I'm the one responsible. And then they hear some music, and Terpsichore, the muse of the dance, comes bursting into the room, and she says, forget it, you two. It's because of my dancing that this work was made money, and you can't do without me. So here we are, just like in the prologue, we're thrust back into the realm of meta theater. We have this play within a play, this framework that surrounds it, and the people on stage are offering their own critique of what you have just seen. This is one of the things that makes me love this work. It's just wonderful, this thing. Let me just show you I was going to say that the end, Apollo, instead of Apollo coming back, the muses now say they're going to call on Apollo, but who should arrive but Momus? He's the god of mockery. And he calms the muses down and says, okay, we're just going to celebrate and sing and dance. And this is the one place where I see that the other function of the prologue, other than introducing the work, shows its head a little bit at the end. And that is, normally in a prologue written by Quinault for Lully, there would have been encomium of King Louis XIV, praised him as the hero and all. But the time we get to Les Fêtes de Thalie, that kind of stuff has gone away. So the only thing that I see as a little vestige of that is here in the epilogue, where Momus comes up instead of Apollo. So it's a bit like saying Apollo, who was so associated with Louis XIV. Remember, he was the Sun King, and there are sun emblems all over the Palace of Versailles. So instead of having Apollo come back, it's the god of mockery who shows up, as if saying Apollo's irrelevant in this day and age. That's the closest little bit of criticism that I see in this work. Okay, so Les Fêtes de Thalie. Oh, her Terpsichore. I want to just show you what Terpsichore looks like. Here she's playing castanets. And this work was so popular that it stayed on the stage in the Paris Opera for a long time. But because it was an opera ballet where it had independent acts, it could be broken apart. And here there was a practice that sprung up in the middle of the 18th century of producing what were called fragments. So you would take one act from one work and one act from another and one from another and put them all on the stage in the same night. So here is number 2 of the ones, as I put it in on the side because it's a little hard to see in the middle here. La Femme, which is the last of the 3 acts in Les Fêtes de Thalie, is put in as number 2. And some of you may recognize Le Devin du Village, which is a very famous one-act opera written by Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Now, so that was for the dramatic context. And what about the 2 authors? These are librettist Joseph La Font and the composer Jean-Joseph Mouret. Now, for both of them, this was their very first opera. So they started off with a bang, I must say. Joseph La Font, we don't know very much about. We don't have a portrait of either one of them, unfortunately. But he was a playwright, and he wrote for the Comédie Française, and he wrote mostly light kinds of works for the Comédie Française, not the heavy-handed ones. Mouret was a violinist. He came from Avignon in southern France, and he moved to Paris in 1707 when he was 25 years old. And he got a job relatively quickly, although we don't know exactly how, with the Duc and the Duchesse du Maine, the Duke and Duchess of Maine. And this is where the connection to Madame de Maintenon comes in, because the Duc du Maine was one of the children of Madame de Montespan, the illegitimate children of Louis XIV and Madame de Montespan. And so he was one of the children that Madame de Maintenon was hired to take care of, to babysit and tutor when he was growing up. And as a matter of fact, he was her favorite among the bunch. And he was somewhat handicapped. He limped a little bit, and he was not very healthy. So she treasured him and took very good care of him. Now, by the time Les Fêtes de Thalie was written and Mouret was working for the family, the Duc du Maine was no longer a little boy. He was in his 40s. And it was actually mostly his wife, the Duchess, who was the real patron. Excuse me. I did find a portrait of her. And she was the one who loved to have parties. She was an insomniac. And she bought a chateau, or she and her husband together bought a chateau called Sceaux, Sceaux, which is outside of Paris. And she was not the least bit interested in hanging around Versailles toward the end of the reign of Louis XIV. So she bought the chateau and she threw lots and lots of parties at night, and she hired Mouret to write music for them. And the biggest series of events for that was in 1714 and 1715. So Mouret, composing this opera at the same time that he was writing all of these things for the Duchesse du Maine, he must have been a very, very busy man at that point. Now, 1714, when this opera was premiered, was only a year before Louis XIV died, almost to the month. And Louis XIV was not in very good health at this point, and he really was not paying attention to things like the opera any longer, even though he had been extremely important in getting it underway in his youth. So when he finally did die in 1715, there was a big change, obviously, and the new king, Louis XV, was only 5 years old when he inherited the throne. He was Louis XIV's great-grandson, all the other people in the line of succession having died. So the regent, Louis XIV's nephew, Philippe d'Orléans, was appointed regent, and he did something remarkably impactful for the theatrical life of Paris, and that was he invited a troupe of Italian comedians to return to Paris. There had been one until 1697 when they were kicked out under the influence of Madame de Maintenon. And everybody missed them, even though their repertoire didn't disappear entirely. It went to the fair theaters. But when the regent took over after his uncle died, one of the first things he did was to call back an Italian troupe. So then what happened was that Mouret was the man on the spot, and he was hired to write the music for the Italian theater. He published quite a bit of the music he wrote for it. And here you can see, this says it's the first collection of divertissement for the new Italian theater. And then it says augmented with all this music that he wrote. And it's dedicated to the Duke of Orleans, who brought back this collection, who was the one who brought back the Italian troupe. And I want to say, this is on my final word here as I'm closing turning things over to Catherine, is that Mouret's music for the Italian theater, which there's lots of it, is finally starting to be investigated a little bit. Some people are starting to pay attention to it. And Catherine and I are two of the people who paid attention to it, because we organized a show that was performed at Cornell a few years ago called Harlequin's Capers, that was built around music that Mouret had written for the Italian theater. So with that, I will stop sharing my screen and turn things over to Catherine, who will tell you about the production that you're going to be seeing.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. Always inspiring. And I will now take over my share screen and see what we can do here. Okay, so when you're watching this, you can imagine that you're basically looking at the stage director's notebook. So we're just going to give you some insights onto how we are interpreting this opera ballet for today. And I would just like to thank Opera Lafayette for putting this on. It's great to have a salon, great to have this discussion. All right. So this engraving from the published libretto gives us a clue to the contemporary feeling of the work. Notice that the characters are wearing what they would normally wear in public. So we don't have one of these mythological fantasy operas with tonnelles and feathers and masks. We have real people with real faces in more or less a real situation. I mean, they're not in the Mount Olympus, but it opens up for Act 1 at the harbor of Marseille. So because they are dressed in contemporary wear and because the opera is set in today's time, I thought it would be a good idea to be faithful to the original conceit and have our performers wearing contemporary clothing from our own era. Most of the time I've been doing reconstructions within the period style, but there was something about this opera that sort of called for a different perspective. The prologue and the last act, La Critique, function as a frame for the opera. We learn that the muse of tragedy, Melpomene, is ruling the stage at the Paris Opera. But then Thalie, the muse of comedy, appears and insists on sharing the Paris Opera's stage. After a bit of fighting, Apollo appears to settle the argument. Although he appreciates Melpomene, he decrees that Thalie deserves to perform as well. In our own day, we might view this as opera versus musical theater. The argument of the prologue is followed by much dancing and singing as performers flood the stage in the role of a performing troupe getting ready for a premiere directed by Thalie. The structure of each act to follow is first, present the conflict with the main characters. Second, bring out the dancers and the chorus, who either celebrate or help to resolve the conflict and then celebrate. This is a standard structure for a ballet of the time. And as Rebecca was saying, each act features a woman and follows the stages of her life, with Act 1 starting out as a girl, Act 2 is the widow, and somebody was wondering if this was out of order. Women could be widows pretty early on if their men are fighting or if there's an accident, so it probably didn't matter to them. Act 3 is the sort of long-standing wife. With the 9 singers, we're using them as a performing troupe where the principal roles are equally distributed, and a singer could be a lead in one act and sing the chorus in the next. So it's really a sense of bringing this whole thing together. Thalie comes; she wants to show her artistry. She has her troupe perform 3 different independent acts, and then they all get together at the end and have a sort of judgment of it. When we get to Act 3, Act 1 with La Fille, the girl, remember our characters in the engraving from the first slide. Well, here they are today. The film On the Town is my inspiration for Act One. The 1949 film with music by Leonard Bernstein and Roger Edens is an adaptation of the Broadway stage musical of the same name, which itself is an adaptation of the Jerome Robbins ballet titled Fancy Free. In fact, some of our choreography by Julian Donahue and Julia Bengston may remind you of Fancy Free. Changes in the script and score were made to the original stage version of On the Town, with most of Bernstein's score dropped in favor of new songs by Edens, who felt that the majority of Bernstein's music was too complex and too operatic for film audiences. Aha, the theme of our opera. This caused Bernstein to boycott the film. Another common denominator with the opera is that the film was directed by a dancer choreographer, Gene Kelly. Personally, I think that it helps to have a choreographer direct these opera ballets because so often the dance is misunderstood and is performed as a sort of adjunct as opposed to an integral part to the opera. The original score of Les Fêtes de Thalie calls for captives. However, considering the lighter nature of the work and how contexts change over centuries, we've decided on sailors instead of captives, who are then granted shore leave. Leonore is a young girl, which reminds me of Judy Garland in her early years, always dancing and singing and loath to be tied down. A captain in love with Leonore, who seems not to return his love, is looking forward to wooing her. Belize, the mother of Leonore, is played by a man. This travesty role is well known in ballet history, and to any of you who have seen the ballet Cinderella, the stepsisters are always played by men. When Leonore rejects the advances of Akash, the mother suggests a more mature woman would appreciate his gifts and offers herself as a candidate. We learn that she has been without her husband, who was taken captive 10 years ago. Lo and behold, Cléon, her husband, was saved by Akash and has arrived that very day on his boat. Of course, it is at an intimate moment when Belize is about to give herself to Akash that the husband arrives on the scene. After the shock, Belize and Cléon are united. Cléon, being grateful to Akash, who saved him, gives him his daughter's hand in marriage. No one asked Leonore how she felt. How ironic to become a woman in the bondage of marriage in exchange for the freedom of a captive. To celebrate, the dancers in the chorus enter. Listen closely when you go to the performance to the text of the sailor and then the sailoress, who equate love with storms at sea and shipwrecks. Not what I would expect to hear, but the final chorus blurs this warning to women with good cheer and, in our production, a drunken sailor dance. Act 2 is La Veuve Coquette, or the Coquettish Widow. The strong personality of Isabel, the widow, made me think of Katharine Hepburn and how she often preferred pants to dresses. Taking place in the country, I see Isabel in her riding outfit with her riding crop. She is well off and has no husband to control her. She seemingly entertains the idea of getting hitched as she leads on Christian the financier and Leandra, a military hero. Doris, who is a confidant of Isabel, runs Isabel's household and is often put into awkward situations, explaining the behavior of Isabel. An exotic entertainment, think dance and chorus, is brought in by Christignon, hoping to impress Isabel. But he is surprised by her late appearance as part of the entertainment in a slinky evening gown. In the end, neither suitor is chosen, and the men leave, starting what may be the beginning of a beautiful friendship. In Act 3, La Femme, or the wife, and for those of you in the audience who are married, how many have you wondered if your husband would wander if he was given the chance? Well, that is the theme of for Act 3, which takes place at Carnival in Venice. Think of the romance and intrigue and the masked people who one might run into at a dance club. In An American in Paris, there is a black and white ball at the end of the film, with gaiety everywhere, guests at tables, lovers hanging over balconies, or hiding in a sea of people and sharing an intimate moment with a stranger. Leslie Caron and Gene Kelly are in a forbidden love, and in fact, their true identities have been hidden from each other during much of the movie. In our opera, other guests, the dancers, appear as a matador, magician, and ballerina doll, while the vocal roles are also in costume and mask. Caliste, the wife, is in Venetian costume and reveals to her friend Doreen that she has decided to test her husband by this disguise. Will he fall in love with her as a stranger? Thinking his wife, Caliste, has left town for 2 days, her husband, Dorant, who is costumed in an 18th century Venetian gentleman get-up, hosts a masked ball and invites the mysterious Venetian woman whom he probably met at the ball the previous night. He is overcome with his feelings for her. Dorant's servant, Zurban, who is costumed as Pierrot, asks why he wants to betray his wonderful wife, but Durant is too carried away for any doubts. He invites his masked mystery woman to dance. And voila, enter the dancers and the chorus. The masked Doreen decides to play the same trick on her own husband, Zurban, but he declares he will never be unfaithful to his wife because she would beat him badly. After amusing and comic dances, the truth is revealed and Caliste is able to forgive her husband for falling in love with her disguised self. All is well, no ironic twist to this story. However, Thalie immediately breaks into the ending, surprising everyone on the stage and probably in the audience, as she claims victory over the tragic stage of Melpomene. The fourth wall is broken between the stage and audience, and we remember we have been witnessing a sort of contest between the muses. And now it's time for judgment. We are now at the finale called La Critique. Need I say more? It is Oscar time. Which muse is the best? The muse of comedy, music, dance, tragedy. They're all on the stage. Apollo refuses to be drawn into a potentially fiery situation. After all, the muses are his daughters, and how could he possibly choose one over the other? Instead, he calls on Momut, the god of mockery, to be the critic and the judge. It is not lost on me that this work is listed as a ballet, and Terpsichore arrives in the finale claiming her proper place for recognition. How timely this is for us. The New York Times, on the day of the Oscars this year, had an article by the Times critic who wrote about dance and how there is no Oscar for dance presented every year, only on some occasions. The critic sent a call to action to the Oscar committee to right this wrong. Post-Oscars, there was much shaming going on in social media as reviews from newspaper journalists for the Oscars praised the dancing in the ceremony, but failed to mention the names of the choreographers. In our production, there are 4 choreographers and an assistant, Julia Bankston and Julian Donahue in Act 1. Anu Nehru is assisted by Pragna Thamir in Act 2, and Caroline Copeland will be doing Act 3, and also with the assistance of the choreographers, she will help put the finale together. When needed, I will fill in for the prologue and finale, but I have a feeling I won't be needed that much. The idea is to have a variety of dance styles gracing the stage, just as our musicals on Broadway today use so many styles. So we're talking clog dancing, the hornpipe, Spanish dance, ballet, maybe something that looks like hip hop, and also some contortion. The ending music for the show is a contradance and chorus. This traditional ending, today called the finale number, is meant to bring the story into everyday life and join the audience with the performers, recognizing that we occupy the same universe, and isn't life wonderful? This will be staged as a dance party, and we hope the stage crew and audience will join us. Thank you again for your attention, and I hope to see you at the show. Patrick, I think we're ready for your insights. I will stop my share, and we'll hear from an artist performing.
Thank you so much. It's so great to be here. So as was mentioned, I will be singing the roles of Bélise and Momus in Les Fêtes de Thalie. And I wanted to talk a little bit today about the role specifically of Bélise and a specific voice type that is unique to French Baroque music. So as we've already shared, Bélise appears in the first act, La Fille, just after the prologue. Bélise is the mother to the young lover, Léonore. Léonore's father, so Bélise's husband, my husband, Cléon, as we know, has been lost at sea for over 10 years, perhaps captured as a prisoner of war, in our case, a sailor lost at sea. And my character has assumed him to be dead. So both bemoaning the loss of my husband, as well as trying to convince my daughter, Léonore, to betroth herself to an attractive suitor while she's in the prime of her youth, I scheme to make her jealous by seducing the younger and heroic Captain Accoste, who is in love with Léonore. So here we have a very comedic character who makes some rather unexpected and quite surprising choices. Mouret sets the music to be sung for the role of Bélise by an haute contre tenor, even though the character is a female. Haute contre is a predominant French operatic tenor voice category that was particularly prevalent in French Baroque and classical opera from the middle of the 17th century until the latter part of the 18th century. And the haute contre voice type is a higher set tenor voice that does share some of the same sung pitches as the countertenor voice type. However, haute contre utilizes a higher degree of chest voice resonance in their vocalism, whereas a countertenor utilizes almost exclusively head voice or falsetto, which is akin to the type or degree of vocalization that a mezzo-soprano or a soprano uses in how they phonate to make sound. And also one distinction between countertenor and haute contre is the type of repertoire that they're utilized in. Countertenors almost exclusively are found in Italian and English Baroque and some classical, whereas French haute contre is exclusively in French Baroque repertoire. And so to convey a much older woman vocally, the role is set for a voice that is lower than mezzo and lower than countertenor. And to make the role especially comedic, the role is sung by a man or en travesti in drag. So travesti roles can be found in operas of Rameau, Lully, Couperin throughout the French repertoire, and they actually also can be found in Italian Baroque operas, even among some of the very first operas ever composed. Actually, Julia, if you would now put up the pictures. So one of the first en travesti roles or haute contre roles was the role of Arnalta in Claudio Monteverdi's Popea. And here we have some photographs of productions that I've had the immense pleasure of being a part of. In the top left corner, that is my dear friend and colleague Emiliano Gonzalez Toro, who as well has performed with Opera Lafayette, I believe maybe in 2018, 2017, or perhaps even earlier. But he is a part of the Opera Lafayette family. Here is Emiliano singing the role of Arnalta in Monteverdi's Popea, and you can see obviously en travesti in drag. This was a production I was involved with at the Opéra National du Rhin in Strasbourg. And notably for the role of Arnalta, who is a nursemaid to Popea, there's a very, very famous aria, Oblivion Soave. And if you look to the top to the right, you'll see here a few more of the characters from Poppaea. And in the center, you will actually see Arnalta, and sleeping right in front of Arnalta is Poppaea. And in this scene, they've just finished Oblivion Soave. And another Italian Baroque opera that features Entravesti is the opera of Erismena by Francesco Cavalli. And so these were operas that were occurring at the same time as, well, especially Erismena, were occurring around the same time, if a bit earlier than Mouret's Les Fêtes de Thalie. So in the second row below, you'll see the role of Alcesta in Erismena, which is another nursemaid role. And I sang this with Festival Aix-en-Provence. And you can see me here in my full getup and wig. So those are just some examples, some visual examples of entravesti roles. And we're very excited to kind of see how that will come to life in Les Fêtes de Thalie with our concept. Thank you so much, Julia. And then now I actually want to show some of the musical side, the preparation of what the vocal artists are working on. And I'll also do a little bit of singing as well. Julia, if you're able to actually pull up those scores again, that'd be great. Thank you so much. So this first score that you're seeing is Belize's introductory recitative in La Fille. And there are a couple of things that you're going to kind of see that I've already begun to write in. Of course, you can see the notes. You can see the French text highlighted in yellow. And then beneath that, you see kind of in this pinkish color I've written in, it is a almost word for word translation. And then there are moments throughout the score where above certain lines, I've written in the poetic translation and or the translation that we have used in the libretto created for us by Rebecca Harris-Warrick. And so in terms of when you're working on music and learning the translation to most effectively sing what you need to sing, it's important to have both a word-for-word translation, so you know how to color each word that you sing, and then you also need the larger poetic meaning, kind of the way in which it most semantically or syntactically, the syntax makes most sense to us in English, so that we can better get across the emotion and the sentiment of the entire thought. So that's one element that goes into the preparation. Another, you'll see also above the French text, you'll see some symbols in these squared brackets. Many of them are letters that we know and use. These are symbols from the International Phonetic Alphabet. And this is a system that singers use, that they study, and they use it to be able to understand and comprehend how you're supposed to pronounce a language, even if you don't speak the language. And so singers take years of diction and language courses to be able to know the special rules that go into singing each language, as well as studying the symbols that correspond to the different vowels and consonants of each language. And so oftentimes, for some words that you see on the page where you don't quite know exactly how that might be pronounced, or if you need a helpful reminder, oftentimes singers will write in specific vowels and consonant combinations to remind themselves of the correct pronunciation in that specific sung vocal context. And lastly, some things you might see, you'll see some breath marks. You might also see moments where even though there's a rest or a beat of silence, you want to carry the continuity of thought over the silence. You might see moments where I want to shift or change color. So those are just some things that you'll see on the page. And lastly, something I'm not quite exploring yet, I'll probably work on with Corneille Bernolet, our chef du chant, who's assisting Christophe Rousset, as well as Christophe when he arrives. Oftentimes, tenors singing on travesti roles will use different vocal colors beyond just emotional context and content, but colors that can show the age or the sex more of the character. I'm still exploring some of those sounds, none of which I will present to you tonight in my reading right now. But some things I am working on is the prosody, the speed of the prosody of the language to try and show sentiments of thought. So I'm going to take a little swig of water, and then I'm going to sing for you these first 2 pages of recit of Belize. Accosté de retour après un long voyage, donnez-lui votre main, couronnez ses soupirs. And then Leonore sings, of the tenderest sighs, emen or marriage, put an end, banish their use. So marriage puts an end to the tenderest sighs. To laugh, dance, and sing is my lot. So Leonore clearly has no desire to get married. And then Belize continues. Depuis que mon époux a quitté ce rivage, dans les pleurs j'ai passé 10 ans. Sans doute il ne vit plus votre seul avantage, m'a fait refuser 1000 amants. Voulez-vous perdre ainsi le printemps de votre âge? So that is a sneak peek of Belize. So here Belize is saying, Accost has returned back after a long voyage. Leonore, give him your hand in marriage. Crown, reward his longing sighs. And then I go on to sing, since my husband has left these shores, I have been in tears for 10 long years. Without a doubt, Cléon, my husband, no longer lives. For your benefit, Leonore, I have refused 1,000 or more suitors. Do you, Leonore, want to waste the springtime of your youth and not take a suitor? So that begins to kind of open up the conflict that Belize has in this scene. If we actually go to the next page down, this is one of our many choruses. As Catherine expressed, it's a wonderful opportunity that the vocal cast has in being very much in an ensemble. We all have both solo roles as well as sing in quartet and quintet, and in this very last instance, all together. And just to quickly point out some things I've written down here. There are all of the choruses. There are some that have five parts, but in this chorus here, we are in 4-part. The top line is the soprano line, as many of you probably can deduce. Though in French Baroque, the term is dessus, and then beneath that is the haute contre line. So in most operatic choruses, you have soprano, alto, or mezzo, tenor, and then bass. In French Baroque, they utilize the haute contre timbre as opposed to a mezzo. So in this instance, I will be singing the haute contre line in this chorus. Beneath that, you have taille or tenor, and then beneath that, you have basse taille or bass. Some other things to point out, you'll see the English translation written in. For our purposes, I put in the translation from the libretto. And then you'll also see, though, in orange, you'll see that I've actually translated the exact word for word meanings of those words, kind of hearkening back to the idea of knowing the word for word translation to try to shade or color that word specific to its meaning within the larger meaning of the line in the poetic translation. You'll also see some interesting symbols. You'll see these plus signs that I've kind of highlighted in blue. And those plus signs, and there are many other, I guess, like diacritical markings above some notes that are actually symbols that refer to different French Baroque ornaments. I will not get into the myriad of French ornaments today. However, you will hear many of them, and you'll hear them in our production, and we're going to have a wonderful time dissecting and learning about even deeper about this style through working with Ryan and Christophe Rousset and Corneille Bernolet on this production. So this final chorus closes out the entire show. And that plus sign that you see refers to a term called tremblement, which is a French Baroque trill. It occurs in rapid succession, oscillating from the pitch above down to the pitch below that it's drawn atop of. And so this final chorus, it sings about, let us enjoy sweet amusements, our fete, our plays, our entertainments, offer charming pleasures. Everything pleases, everything satisfies. Oh, sorry. And then verse 2, the triumph over all hearts, love lends here his victorious darts. And then on the second page, you see the translation, everything pleases, everything satisfies, everything laughs, everything enchants. The sweetest pleasures fulfill our desires. So it's Momus and everybody deciding all together that Terpsichore, Polyhymnia, and Thalie, everybody's done a really amazing job. That I think wraps up a lot of what I wanted to share. And I think we can go into Q&A if there are some questions.
That's perfect, Patrick. Thank you so much to all of our presenters. I just learned so much, and it's really whet my appetite for this wonderful performance that we have to come. If you have questions, do feel free to unmute yourself and ask them in the live real time, or you can feel free to put them in the chat. We did have a question come in from Takemi, who asked about the libretto of Les Fêtes de Thalie costing 30 sol, and wondering if there was a translation of that into modern currency, or maybe someone here wants to talk a little bit about sort of the socioeconomic cost of these things back in the 18th century.
I guess that's me, probably.
Yeah, go for it, or I have some vague ideas.
Oh yeah, okay. Well, it's the L would be a U today, so it's sou, little, and I don't know. It's not expensive. It's not nothing, but these are little books. These are not big things. I mean, you see the originals today; they're small and they're printed on paper, not the fancy paper, the vellum that you get for the scores so much. But they're accessible. People use them, and apparently, I've been told, I haven't seen this myself, but because the lights were up in the theater, so people could actually read them when they were there, and that some surviving copies of librettos still have, you can see wax dripping on the pages where people have been holding candles to see even better. Maybe they were nearsighted and had to hold their candle a little bit more. Julia, what were you going to say about that?
Oh, I mean, French currency is very tricky to pin down in exact today calculations, just because, we're not buying the equivalent things. There's 20 sous in a livre, which is sort of the main unit of currency in this period. And generally a couple of livres might be the working day's wage of sort of a working class person. So this was a good part of a day's wage for a Parisian. So it's not accessible to everyone, but it's not totally inaccessible either. Do we have any other questions for our speakers, or the speakers might have questions for each other? Yeah, Catherine, please.
Becky, I just wanted to ask you, you mentioned that it was the first opera for La Font and Mouret. Was it the first opera that they wrote together or the first opera that they wrote and was presented?
The first opera that either one of them had ever worked on.
Wow,
So, yeah, I
amazing.
know, it's pretty nice debut, isn't it?
Yeah.
And then, and Mouret, I'm not, yeah, La Font wrote a couple more librettos after that. Mouret wrote 5 operas total, and he wrote 2 tragedies, but they weren't big successes. The first one was a complete flop. It was pulled after one performance, and the next one had more success. But he was better at the lighter stuff. So the other works that he wrote, he never wrote anything again that was quite this overtly funny, but he wrote things that were lighthearted and joyous and full of celebrations in them again and other times. So that was clearly his gift, and I think he found his niche when he went to the Italian theater and was writing for them.
Thank you.
We're also asking, so if you could clarify the theater that this opera was performed in, just to clarify sort of the difference between the opera and the Comédie Italienne in this period.
This was performed at the Paris Opera. I mean, that's why it was why La Font felt the need to justify it, because that was a theater where, like Melpomene says at the beginning of the prologue, where you expect to come and see Armide and Bellerophon and Phaeton and all these mythological characters, heroes that do great deeds and are rewarded at the end. Usually, most of these operas end happily with a marriage. Not all of them. Armide ends a disaster, and so does Phaeton, who takes his father's chariot of the god and drives, flies too close to the sun and he crashes to earth. But so they are serious operas, most of them. That's why this one was so anomalous, with his characters dressed in contemporary dress. The Fêtes Vénitiennes, which I talked about, of Campo, which is 4 years earlier, set in Venice, that also used characters in contemporary dress because they were just supposed to be people that had gone to Venice for carnival and were having a good time. It's like going to Reno or Las Vegas more, I guess, gambling and having fun while they were there. But yeah, so the Théâtre Italien didn't exist in 1714 when this opera came on. It was closed at that time between 1697 and 1716. But what there was the Comédie Française, which was where the spoken theater was. But they did mostly serious plays, but they often did an evening. It's really interesting, I think. They did 2 plays an evening. So they do one serious tragedy and then one fluffy thing, like the kind La Font would write at the end, one act something or other to round off the evening. And then there were the theaters that were done at the fairs, the seasonal fairs, with temporary theaters. And Julie is the expert on that. So you should tell us about that one.
Oh, sorry, I was distracted by a question coming into the chat. I mean, I think what this really shows, though, is just sort of the wave of modernity that Mouret was riding, right? So the Regency will sort of usher in this wave of more comedy, more Italian music, and this opera ballet really sticks on so long because it is on the first wave of those developments. Karen is asking what year this opera.
May I just say one more thing?
Oh,
just please. Add Melpomene at the beginning of the prologue, when she's claiming that she governs the stage. I mean, this is the stage directions say this is set on the stage of the Paris Opera. So it really is the theater within the theater. You're supposed to be seeing that. And the Muses are there coming down to control the Paris Opera. And what she represents is Jean-Baptiste Lully, the works of the guy who'd been dead since 1687, his old-fashioned works, his tragedies. Those are the ones that she's talking about. And then, so as you said just now, Julia, that Mouret is riding the wave of modernity, and he's looking around at the fair theaters and the Italian theater. And even though he's writing for the Paris Opera, he's borrowing from these more popular traditions.
Wonderful. We had one other quick question in the chat, and I want to make sure that everyone gets their turn, and we'll wrap up at 7, and those who want to stay a couple more minutes can. Karen is asking for clarification if this was performed at Maintenon School, because of course we've been talking about that, her school, and all the other sort of publicity for the other performances. But did you want to clarify that, Becky?
No, it wasn't. I'm just trying to imagine what that would have been like.
You would not have liked it.
What kind of? I'm sure the girls would have loved it, but I think the chaperones would not. Madame de Maintenon would have been scandalized, I'm sure. I don't think she ever saw this.
This is reflecting sort of the reaction to Maintenon, to put a cap on the season. We had Jill and then Susan.
Thank you. So I just wanted to ask a quick question of Catherine. I really enjoyed seeing your inspiration in some of the more present day things like On the Town and so forth. And this whole notion of the prologue, I'm wondering if you looked at all at, for example, Pippin or A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum, both of which have some extremely amusing prologues that kind of incorporate dance and are very lively, that might have inspired you. That's all.
I am a fan of musical theater, and I do draw much inspiration from what you just mentioned and more. On Saturday afternoons, my mom and I would just like watch all the films of the great musicals that happened, all the Busby Berkeley, a lot of the comedy. And, I think that, we should remember that we have a debt to pay to France, because really, I think it was the French that sort of, gave this impetus to the development of the musical theater as we think of it today. And I love drawing inspiration from those. Thank you, Jill.
Wonderful. Susan, did you have a question as well?
Yeah, I do. I don't know, Julia, whether it would be you or Becky who would answer, but I was curious whether the this one first precedent of using sort of street dress, everyday dress, caught on, or did that sort of not satisfy the desire for, more fun escapism, and people went back to sort of fancy dress, or did you see other performances that used contemporary dress catch on?
It depends on the nature of the work. When a work like Les Fêtes de Thalie was revived, then presumably the dress would be updated to reflect 1765 instead of 1714 and whatever the costumes. On the other hand, the Paris Opera, just like every other arts organization, had financial problems. So they had a stock of costumes in the back room.
Yes.
And when the next show came on, they would see what they could recuperate from the previous show and put people in it. So I can't fully answer that question. I don't know, except to say that obviously when you're doing an opera set in ancient Rome or something like that, then the costumes still wouldn't look like togas, but they would look more like they would be stylized in a way that would to try to represent the ancient times, which is not the case here. But there was a lot of recycling going on.
The comic theater had a bear costume in the 1750s, and there's a weird number of operas that have bears in them. And I do sort of wonder if they were just very excited they had gotten this costume for something. We have a question about choreography from Linda. Actually, maybe I will put an end to the official discussion here, because I know we've taken up your time and we're so gracious to have you, and I'll keep going with questions for just another 10 minutes or so. So if you do have to leave, do feel free to do so, and I'll just take a couple more questions. We have coming in from Linda about the choreography. How are the dance makers, Catherine, for each act working with or adjusting the movement styles they use from today with the structures of Mouret's period music? So what's going on between sort of more contemporary dance and the structures that the composer has left us?
Well, fortunately, the choreographers are well versed in the dances from the Baroque. So they're hearing like the rhythm, they're hearing the phrases in that sort of the range that the Baroque period has. Sometimes when you have a modern choreographer, they're used to doing like a long gesture, and they might do that for 5 measures, but you can't do that for 5 measures in a duple meter bourrée, because it just doesn't have that length. So they're acknowledging that, and they are taking some like traditional dance styles to some of the music that's more calling more for that. For instance, a hornpipe phrase, or like in the Spanish, working with some Spanish. Well, sometimes they're more like ballet steps, but the sort of terre-à-terre that you have in ballet choreography works well again with the proportion of the musical phrase and the rhythms. So there's definitely a sensitivity to that, and I think that as long as we keep true to the musicality, and also the sort of tropes in the music that suggest certain characterizations, that we'll be honoring the period.
It's great to hear that insight. Thank you so much.
Mhm.
Well, Becky, maybe we should wrap up with a preview of what's happening in 2 weeks' time. Oh, Jace has a.
Oh,
Yeah,
I thought there were a couple more questions I was looking at.
Oh, I'm
yeah.
sorry.
Oh yeah, I do see a question from Bruce saying,
Oh, awesome.
was pass through that. Was new music, especially dances, added during the revivals? And how did you choose what to perform in this version from the original score? The I cannot pronounce that.
Salon.
That was published in 1714.
Well, that was a joint decision. Okay, but let's see what I was going to say. Whether music was added in revivals, I would guess that not for the first couple, as far as I can tell, because there were some later scores published. But but starting in the 1750s, by then I'm sure there were things, because they, especially in the divertissement, dance music would be swapped out, and the story would stay the same, but sometimes things would, and recitative was sometimes rewritten. I'm sure there was. I haven't tried to track that down. As to which version to perform, that was a question right at the beginning, because as you, Bruce, you probably know, the La Veuve, the original slot for La Veuve Coquette was just called La Veuve, and so we did the one that was added in the following year to when it was changed out, because that one was kind of grim. It ends with it just has one suitor, and the suitor is very persistent, but the widow doesn't want to marry him, and finally her confidant just says, well, just since you can't make up your mind, just go lie on the grave of your husband, and that's the way it ends. And that just seemed a little grim. So we just, and the Veuve Coquette is just so wonderful, with these two suitors and the cynical, jaded view that she has of just dismissing both of them at the end. And what Catherine is doing with it, with wonderful, I think, with Catherine Hepburn, is just a brilliant idea to get that across. The critique was added 2 months later, and so that was not hard to do, because it was a nice frame. It was just in the first run of performances, it was still within that framework. And there was one other act that was very hard to jettison, which was added in 1722, called La Provençale. So another one that Mouret said in the South, where he came from. And it's a really wonderful work too. And it even has some of the dialogue sung in Occitan, the language of Provence, not in French. But so it's too bad we couldn't do that, but it would have made the evening too long.
Thanks. Just one question, if I could follow up. One piece from that supplement made it into an opéra comique that I've dealt with quite a bit, Le Diable à Quatre. As a vaudeville, it became so popular, they didn't always recall where it came from. That's what became known as the cotillon.
Oh, you're going to hear that. You'll hear that. That's
okay,
in there.
good.
Yeah, because the supplement pieces got integrated into the later score, and we had a manuscript score, a full score, fortunately, to supply the orchestration. So that's what Corneille edited and is doing it. Yeah, you'll hear that one. Yeah.
Okay, super.
Yep.
Yet more evidence, though, to this very long afterlife of this piece. That's a great point,
yeah.
Bruce.
Yeah, that was published as a contredanse, the Cotillon, in 1716. So it was really just 2 years after the opera. So it was very, very popular. That tune became instantly, a big hit. It's kind of a dorky tune, in my opinion, but it was a huge hit. I don't know.
Maybe the dancing was great.
Yeah, Catherine, what are you doing with that tune, with the Cotillon?
Well, I'm not the choreographer, so I can't answer that question.
We'll see. We'll find out.
Right.
Any other questions I missed?
I think that was the last one. I just want to say thank you so much for sticking around and hanging out with us during this hour. We really do hope to see you at either our May 3rd or May 4th performance here in DC, or on May 7th in New York City. And with that, I guess we'll go ahead and let everyone go. Thank you so much for staying, and we hope you have a great rest of your night.
Thanks so much to all our speakers. Amazing to learn from you.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Thank you.